Hello everyone, it's Greg from Edinburgh and Linlithgow Renaissance Fencing Academy here. Today's video is back onto the topic of sword design, and specifically I want to talk about proportionality in sword design. Now I'm going to cover two different aspects of proportionality very briefly. Number one is the proportions between different parts of a sword. And number two is the proportion of a sword in relation to the body or physique of its wielder. So let's get straight into the topic. Okay, so first of all, proportionality within a sword's design. In other words, what proportions there were between different parts of a single sword. Now, in the medieval period, as shown in the diagrams up here, designers constructed whatever it was they were designing, usually according to ratios. Now this is found most clearly in medieval architecture. It's how they were able to construct vast buildings like castles and cathedrals without the benefit of modern scientific knowledge and modern scientific measuring devices. So they relied on ratios. Now, as you can see here, that could extend to weapon design. Now, these images are borrowed from a fascinating article by Peter Johnson, which was published in an old Wallace Collection Museum book about rapiers and other swords. Now, these are specifically actually late medieval swords. And the diagrams are him demonstrating the different kinds of ratios and proportions that can be found within that group of swords. Now, I should say other types of sword wouldn't necessarily follow the same geometrical or ratio principles, but they would have some kind of similar principles behind their design. Now, the main point I want to make about this is there is something beautiful, something very aesthetically pleasing about these weapons because they fit this ratio. They're just easy on the eye, so to speak. And this is one of the main reasons why bad reproductions or fantasy weapons often look just strange or silly, and they don't follow realistic rules of proportion. So that's something interesting to consider when you're looking at swords for sale, perhaps in a collector shop, and particularly when you see weapons in films or in fantasy books and artwork and things like that. So yeah, there you go. Proportionality within sword design is very important. Okay, so the second point is proportionality between a sword and its wielder. So there are a number of different historical fencing authors who, within their treatises, advise selecting a sword based on how big it is relative to your own body, your own physique. Now, the way of measuring a sword and what the ideal sword is will obviously vary from fencing style to fencing style and between different types of sword. So different swords are designed to do different things. Different fencing masters had different ideas about tactics and how to control and maneuver your blade and so on and so forth. Because my main speciality is in rapier fencing within the Italian tradition, I'm going to focus on that. So, Rodolfo Campoferro in his treatise of 1610 actually gives a couple of different rules of thumb for selecting a sword, but in my opinion the most useful one is he says if you hold a sword with its tip on the ground, the pommel should come to just below the armpit. Obviously that is a rough or approximate measurement. What does that exactly mean? Well, luckily you can find what it means in various other sources. For example, this diagram is taken from Federico Ghisliero's treatise from around 1587, I believe. Now, the diagram itself is actually from part of his book, which is talking more about footwork, but conveniently, the fencer is holding his sword, a type of rapier, in a position where we can clearly see it matches Capoferro's idea of the perfect sword. Another similar image is this one of the French fencing master Henri de Saint-Didier. So he was writing in the 1570s, so he was a contemporary of Giacomo di Grassi's. This picture is a portrait picture included within his treatise, but again, through happy circumstance, we can clearly see the length of the sword that he's wearing, and again, it does conform to Capoferro's idea of the perfect sword. So, if we follow this advice for, let's call it Italianate rapier fencing, your sword should come to just below your armpit. Now that means the pommel, if you're resting the tip on the ground, should be maybe an inch or so below your armpit. I would say between 1 inch and 2 inch. So maybe something like 5-6 centimeters below the armpit. Now, why did masters like Capoferro advocate selecting a sword on the basis of your own physique? You would think that a taller person could get away with using a shorter sword because the reach of their arm would compensate for that, and a shorter sword would be lighter and easier to use. And the converse of that would be a smaller person should perhaps choose a longer sword to increase the reach which their smaller physique would otherwise deny them. But this is not what the masters are saying. If you're a short person, you should use a shorter sword. If you're a tall person, you should use a longer sword. Why is that? It is counterintuitive, I think. My belief is that the underlying message here is that a sword which is proportional to your body will handle in a way which is appropriate for you. So the sword will behave properly. You'll be able to control it properly while fencing if it is the correct relative length to your own body. Now, you could maybe make some counter arguments to that. Perhaps you could dispute that using modern scientific methods for measuring people's strength or whatever. But the point isn't really what modern people think about this sort of thing. The point is, how were the period people thinking? What was their mentality? If we're trying to recreate a historical martial art, then we need to put ourselves inside the minds of the historical people who used the weapons and think about what sort of weapons they were using and why. And this is the answer, broadly speaking, for historical Italian rapier fencing. So, my advice to you all is, the next time you're buying a sword, find out what size the sword should be according to your fencing style. And if you are training Italian rapier fencing with me, then I've just shown you how to take measurements for yourself. All right. I will leave it there for today. That's all for now. Bye.